So today's review session is on chapter 12. I know I was late to put in that my review session is today, and Mr. Thompson's holding one on chapter 14 tomorrow. And I know a lot of people signed up for me. So because of that, and I need to talk with Mr. Thompson about this too, I'm going to hold a review session tomorrow as well. So if you did sign up with me thinking I was going to, but then like, oh, you know, Mr. Thompson, I will both hold one, so you'll be covered if you sign up. Okay. So today we're talking about chapter 12. This is one of the most important units of our chapters of the unit, one of the most important chapters of the year, talking about what leads to the Civil War. There's a lot of different parts to this. And so there's a couple things that are put in here that kind of seem random. So I want to cover some of the random things in here, and then we'll get into kind of the what leads to Civil War. And the first kind of big random thing that comes in is with immigration. Okay. So we talked in class about what causes immigration, right? What's something that contributes to immigration? So what causes immigration? What leads to it? Yeah. Okay, we have a variety of push and pull factors. A push factor is a reason why you leave your home country. And there's a couple like big push factors we talked about in this unit. What's the biggest push factor, the easiest push factor? The Irish potato thing. That's the one that I think most students remember when we talk about this chapter, right? The Irish potato famine. In Germany, there were political uprisings, right? And the pull factor is the reason why you're pulled to the US. Why would you want to come to the US? And so some people say that there's more jobs, there's available land, there are different rights that people have in the United States, right? So these are reasons why people might want to come. However, after immigrants arrive, we see some important effects. What's the easiest effect to remember about what happens after immigrants arrive? Nativism is probably the easiest. Like when immigrants come to the United States, when immigrants come to the United States, there's a rise of nativism, which is anything anti-immigration. Okay? People who are nativists are often so they're anti-immigrant. They're often anti-Catholic. They're afraid that all the Irish immigrants are coming in are Catholic, and they don't like that. In fact, they even create their own political party during this time. What was that political party called? The Know Nothings. And so other effects, we see big cities grow. We see workers in factories. Okay. Questions about some of the causes and effects of immigration in the 1840s and 50s. Okay. Let's get to the big stuff. Conflicts between the North and South, right? We've been talking about conflict throughout the whole year, and it comes to a head here in this unit. An event that happened outside of this unit, happened in Unit 3, but is addressed a few times here, is the Missouri Compromise. What did the Missouri Compromise say? So new states above Missouri will be a what? Free states. Anything below is a slave state. Right? So that's the understood, like, where we're coming from here. However, that doesn't end the conversation, right? Just because they come up with a compromise does not mean that everything is fixed. In fact, it's going to get even more confusing after the Mexican-American War. Why does the Mexican-American War make things more confusing or bring up conflict? What happens at the end of the war? So we get a bunch of land, right? That's in the Mexican Cession. And what's the big question we're asking with this new land? Will it be free or slave states? So there's lots of different ideas of what we should do with the land. Some say, well, let's just extend the Missouri Compromise line to this new land. Others, like Stephen Douglas, have a new idea. What's his policy? Popular sovereignty, right? Whenever we see or hear Stephen Douglas, we think popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty means what? States get to vote for themselves. The people vote in a state. Okay, specifically, this means people are voting on the issue of slavery. And so some said, oh, okay, let's make this land open to slavery. Some people said, oh, no, let's let people vote on it. Okay. Now, ultimately, they're going to come to a compromise again. In the Compromise of 1850. Whenever there's a compromise, both sides get something. So let's try to remind ourselves. What does the North get? California as a free state, right? So how can you remember that California is attached to the Compromise of 1850? What happens the year before? In 1849, there's the gold rush where thousands of people move to California. They get a bunch of people, and that brings up the question, what should we do with California? In the compromise, California will be a free state. What does the South get? They get a couple things. Popular sovereignty where? In where? Someone said it? In the Mexican Cession. Right? They're like, score, this could be good. And they get what? Fugitive Slave Act. Remember, that's the law that makes it easier to accuse African Americans in the North of being fugitive slaves, people who have run away seeking freedom. And it's easier for them to be sent into slavery in the South. What does the North think about this Fugitive Slave Act? They're really upset about it, right? They don't want to follow it. In fact, they're going to lean more into helping people through the Underground Railroad, which we talked about in class, right? That's the way to help freedom seekers moving their way north from plantations in the South. We have a famous book written during this time by Harriet Beecher Stowe. What was that book called? Uncle Tom's Cabin. And it showed Northerners the brutality of slavery, and it showed like families being separated. It showed inhuman treatment of enslaved people, right? So it's opened the eyes for many Northerners. Now, Stephen Douglas is not done with his fight for popular sovereignty, especially in the 1850s when Kansas becomes an issue. There's more people moving into the Kansas and Nebraska territories, and so they decide to pass the Kansas and Nebraska Act. What does that say? They're going to compromise by doing what there? Popular sovereignty. Now, if they let the people choose, this overturns, this changes the old compromise. What old compromise does this change? Missouri Compromise, because under that compromise, they're supposed to be free states. But now with this popular sovereignty, it opens it up to the possibility they could be slave states. So it stops Missouri Compromise. Is that marker getting hard to read? They're allowed to vote on the issue of slavery. And remember, there's a lot of people who are pro-slavery who sneak over the day of the election to try to sway the vote. What were they called? Border ruffians. So border ruffians sneak over the day of the election. They sway the vote, and the vote goes to the pro-slavery side. And so the pro-slavery people, they start making their own pro-slavery government. They write their own pro-slavery constitution, and they set up their own pro-slavery capital in Lecompton. The anti-slavery people, though, they're so upset by all this election tampering, they set up their own government in Topeka. This is the anti-slavery Kansas. Oops. And they're both saying, I'm the real state government. No, I'm the real state government. Well, we wrote the real state constitution. No, we wrote the real state constitution. So which is the real one? Ultimately, Stephen Douglas is going to be asked, well, which one do you support? And ultimately, he says neither. He says, yeah, the pro-slavery side won, but the election was fraudulent. We don't believe it. So Kansas is going to be in this weird, like, non-state issue for a while. But that doesn't end the conflict between these two. In fact, the conflict's going to get worse. What is that conflict called? Bleeding Kansas. Where we have pro-slavery and anti-slavery people attacking each other, right? Pro-slavery people attack anti-slavery people at the town of Lawrence, Kansas. Anti-slavery people led by John Brown go and attack pro-slavery people at Potawatomi Creek. So we have all these back and forth attacks between pro and anti-slavery people. We see a growing number of Americans outside of Kansas disliking what's happening here and joining the Free Soil movement. What did the Free Soilers believe? Stop the spread of slavery. They don't want to go down in the South and end it there. They just want to stop the spread of slavery into the territories. But all this changes with the Supreme Court case, Dred Scott versus Stanford. The Dred Scott case decided a few things. Remember, he was trying to sue for his freedom. Number one, it said African Americans aren't citizens. They are not and can never be citizens, Roger Taney declared. Say slaves are property. And if slaves are property, he says the government cannot take away people's property without due process. So this basically invalidates the Missouri Compromise. He said that law was unconstitutional from the beginning. And it opens slavery in territories. Oops. Remember the justice who decided this? Roger Taney. It looks like Taney, but it's actually pronounced Taney. Okay, Worst person in the world at this. Calhoun is dead, so he takes over. Okay. 2 years later, John Brown is back. And John Brown goes to Harper's Ferry. What is he trying to do? Steal weapons. To start what? Start a slave revolt. What's the name of the person who does this again? John Brown. Is he successful? No, he's captured. He's convicted of servile insurrection and he's executed. But that creates, it makes him a martyr to the North. Like, wow, you know, he was fighting for a good cause. Maybe I don't agree with his method, but he fought for something he believes in. To the South, they're like, wow, you know, they can't believe how far abolitionists would go, that white people would go and try to start a slave revolt like this. They see this as a sign that Northerners are becoming more extreme. Okay, that's what they would say. By this time, the Republican Party has began to grow. What's the big policy the Republican Party believes in? What's something that Republicans believe in? Stop the spread of slavery, which is called what? Free soil. Okay. We have Lincoln, right, who is going to run for a U.S. Senate seat in Illinois versus, who does he go against? Douglas, right? Remember the Lincoln-Douglas debates where Douglas says, yeah, popular sovereignty is the most important thing to me. And that's going to make the South not trust him. And so who wins that first debate, or who wins the first election? Douglas wins. Douglas wins the first election for the Senate seat. For the Senate seat. And then we have the election of 1860, where we have Lincoln, the Republican. We have Douglas, the Northern Democrat. And who's the last guy? Breckinridge. We don't talk about him too much. Oops. But he's the Southern Democrat. So the Democrats are split, which means what's going to happen? It allows Lincoln to win, right? So if they weren't split, if they just had one Democrat, it's possible Lincoln went to one. But because the Democrats are split, it enables him to win all of the northern states. And Breckinridge wins almost all the southern states. It's just some of the like border states that are going to split to a couple to Douglas and a couple to John Bell, which was 58. That's for a Senate seat. Yep. Okay, so once Lincoln is elected, what does the Deep South do? The Deep South secedes. Remember the first state to secede? South Carolina. They feel like Lincoln is going to attack and end slavery, even though he repeatedly says, I'm not doing that. I'm just trying to stop the spread of slavery in the territories. They don't trust him. They think he's an extremist and he's a radical. And so they secede. So do all the deep southern states. They will secede. It's not till later on that Lincoln says in his first inaugural address, secession is illegal. And he says he's willing to fight. So, for example, when we have military bases in the South, he is going to defend that. He's going to send resources and supplies to these bases around the South, like Fort Sumter. So we're sending a bunch of supplies, not weapons, supplies to our U.S. Army base in Fort Sumter, located right outside the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina. And the Southern soldiers begin to attack by shooting cannons at it. This is the first battle, or first attack. No one dies in the battle except for a horse. And then what does Lincoln do in response? After Fort Sumter, what does he do? He calls for war and he calls for volunteers. Right? Remember, in his first inaugural, he basically says, hey, I'm not going to start the war, but if you do, I'm going to finish it. I'm willing to fight. They call for volunteers. What does the Upper South do in response to that? The Upper South responds by seceding, because they're like, how can a national government declare war on the southern states? That's crazy. We're seceding too. So this all leads to the creation of the Confederate States of America, which originally was started in February, I believe, so a few months before Fort Sumter, with its first president. Do you remember his president name? Jefferson Davis. This leads to different strategies. We're going a little bit into chapter 13, but that's okay. What's the North's strategy for winning the war? They have a three-part strategy. What's one of them, Bridget? An economic blockade. Let's use our ships to prevent the South from trading with foreign nations, because we know they don't have factories. They have to either build a factory from scratch or trade with another country. So let's blockade them. What else? Take the Mississippi River. Okay, cut their ability to trade things up and down the river, move men, move weapons. And the last one, take the capital. The capital city is what? Richmond. 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 Okay. What's that? Or you can just know that it's the capital. But I would know Richmond, the city name. What's the South strategy? Defense. Defense and hold on as long as you can. Hope that the North will get bored or sick of war. And that's where we're going to end for today, everybody. Any questions?